It's a pleasure to have Riley Hollingsworth with us tonight. Riley was an attorney with the FCC, and he was responsible for enforcement of the amateur radio service for many years. I know after he left the FCC, after a long and distinguished career there, he became vice director of the Atlantic Division. And following that, he began work with the FCC and the ARRL to put together a monitoring program. So Riley was responsible for the initial formation and implementation of the volunteer monitor program, which replaced the official observers. And I'm really interested to hear what he has to tell us about the current status of this wonderful, it really is a remarkable, remarkable thing that that we are actually responsible for policing ourselves in conjunction with the FCC. And I think one thing I'd really like to hear about Riley is that I've heard you mention before that there are certain activities that are really critical in being controlled and managed, and probably more important than most amateur radio operators understand. These are some activities that may be a pain in the neck to most of us, but I think you can explain how they really put in danger the hobby's credibility with communications industry, for instance, and negotiations with Congress. So with that, Riley, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, first I have to correct a very serious error that you made. You referred to me as an attorney. I'm not an attorney, I'm a lawyer. And for those of you who don't know the difference, a lawyer is somebody that went to law school and wants to do public service and further the law. An attorney is somebody that went to law school and never got over it. So I consider myself a lawyer, although I did work with lawyers. I did work with attorneys. I try not to work with attorneys. You were talking about antenna damage. We had this Debbie tropical storm come through here, and I have a old TA-33 beam. In fact, it's 40 years old, and it's on a 10-foot mast mounted on a what looks like a windmill tower. It's actually an old beacon-like tower from an airport in South Carolina, and it's only 35 feet high, but you can go up a ladder on the side, and when you get to the top, you open a gantry, step in there and close the gate, and it has safety rails around it, so you can walk around up there. Well, I noticed during the storm that this TA-33 is moving about 10 degrees left and right. And I noticed that the more I kept looking at it over a day or two, it was coming down the mast a few feet. So it came down the mast about 5 feet. And I went up there after the storm, and one of the U-bolts had broken. The mast was still, the beam was still calibrated with the rotor. It had just dropped by moving back and forth about 5 feet. So I replaced the U-bolt, and I'm just going to leave it there. I'm only using 5 feet of losing 5 feet of height, and it's head height now, so I can work on it. And I got to change the old coax. It's been up there about 20 years. So I didn't have any damage, but it was kind of a weird thing. And I was planning all this about how I was going to drop the mast, slide the antenna up, and raise it again. And I decided I'll just leave it. And I won't mess with it until the rotor breaks. And then I'll have a reason to go up there. The most important thing about this whole volunteer monitor program is that there must be an enforcement presence out there somewhere. The FCC has lost half of its field offices. It's lost a little more than half of its field engineers, its agents, who were very good people, although a lot of very good people stayed. And if you ever get a chance to do it, if you haven't done so already, go to fcc.gov and look at the daily digest some week, any given day. You will be astonished. It's pages long, the things that the FCC has to deal with that don't involve RF. That's what amazes me. I mean, it's internet, it's universal service agreement fraud. I know a person down at the FCC in Washington who has $7 million worth of universal service fraud cases on his desk. They have all kinds of stuff to deal with. And there are a good number of amateur operators out there among the field engineers, especially in this area, but they have so many priorities. So the official observer program from the old days was actually started in 1994. And it was a very good program, but over the years, as society changed, the official observers became disheartened because, 25 years ago, if you got an official observer notice in the mail, you were grateful because you thought, wow, I'm glad it came from the official observer program instead of the FCC. It could be a fine. But in today's society, which is rude, ungrateful, boisterous, and selfish, as the society evolved, the OO started getting abuse from people. In the old days, it'd be, thank you for sending me this. Later on in the program, it was, who do you think you are to send me something like this? Everybody's so easily offended. You hold the door for somebody these days, they think you're going to steal their wallet. And you see people arguing over a parking space at Walmart when there's 100 vacant spaces. And probably one of those two people spend about $40 or $50 a month to go to the Y for an exercise program. But when they go to Walmart, they want to park in the front door. So it's just, we're in very weird times. Hopefully it's a pendulum and it will swing back. I'm hoping it will. But we're just in very strange times. And it scares me because I don't know if you ever saw the Charles Manson interview with Diane Sawyer, one of his last interviews. And Charles Manson said, used to it meant something to be crazy, but now everybody's getting crazy. And so it makes me think Charles Manson was a prophet because he sure was talking about our times. But anyway, back in 2019, 2018, in a meeting with the FCC, they suggested that we totally ditch the OO program and revamp it and have a volunteer monitor program with a new and stronger program, a program in which they would work with us and they would refer cases to us and we would refer cases to them. And they guaranteed us that our cases would get priority. And so they wanted to do this because of the explosion in communications technology from satellite to internet and everything else that they suddenly had to become involved with, and the fact that they lost so many engineers and lost so many field offices. Now, don't get me wrong, all of the monitoring stations are still all around the country, and they're all tied into Columbia, Maryland. So if they have time and they want to get you, they can hit a button and they'll know where you are. I can't, they won't even tell me how close they can get, but I know at the last time, years ago, when they could tell me, it was astonishingly close. But they have so many priorities and also with other agencies too. So anyway, we had several meetings on the volunteer monitor program, and they promised us more detailed training and management of those serving as volunteer monitors. So we saw it as an opportunity to work more closely with the FCC and totally rebrand the OO program. So we finally signed off on the agreement late 2019. It had to be approved by, I don't know how many layers of bureaucracy, but they signed off on it. But the FCC felt that about 150 to 175 volunteer monitors would be a manageable number. And so in the summer of 2019, we started taking applications, and then we went right down the list chronologically of the applications. And when we got to about 175, we continued interviewing, but the rest of them, there were 225 applications, got put into a reserve pool, which because of COVID and tower accidents and old age and sickness, we've had to draw from the reserve pool. So that worked out very well. Those that weren't initially selected because we already reached our quota went into the reserve pool, and they all agreed to be in the reserve pool. So in 2020, we had a very soft rollout in which the volunteer monitors learned what to listen for and not to be petty. We don't cite somebody because they didn't ID for 20 minutes and something like that. We don't get into that because our goal is not to aggravate the hell out of everybody. Our goal is to have them buy into amateur radio and realize that somebody might be listening to them. Somebody might be demonstrating amateur radio to a grandkid or a son or whatever, or neighbor, anybody they're interested in amateur radio. And the world will end for amateur radio when we are embarrassed to demonstrate it. We have to realize that. So anyway, the FCC viewed it as a force multiplier, and they suggested that the volunteer monitors serve about 3 years. And that turned out to be true. 90-something% of the volunteer monitors renewed after 3 years. Now, we lost, as I said, dozens due to health issues, some very unfortunate and sad accidents. We lost 10 to COVID, but 90%, 95% signed up for a second 3-year term, and that's what we're in now. And we did go through our reserve pool, but we get applications for the VM program a couple a week, and so far we've been getting into them. Now, let's look at what we do. As I said, our goal is to have people buy into this and be aware of what they sound like, how they operate, how important it is. We get about 100 to 200 incident reports every year from the volunteer monitors, and that'll be things like deliberate interference, a wide band signal, somebody that's 10 kilohertz wide for some reason, an FT8 operator that's a technician on 40 meters. We get a number of those, and it's not all their fault. We couldn't figure out why so many technicians were operating FT8 on 40 until I found a very popular band plan that was handed out at a ham fest recently over down in Western Pennsylvania, and there's a mistake in that. So when we contacted these people, most of them were scared to death, and I think in 90% of the cases it was absolutely unintentional. Now, of course, you're going to have 10% of people that will push the system. If you say you can do A and B, they'll want to do C. If you can do C, they'll say, no, I want to do D and E. You knew them in the 4th grade, and they haven't changed very much. We always have that element, and we've just got to keep that tamped down. But some of these people, a couple of people were so upset they were going to sell their equipment. It scared them to death. I said, no, you made a mistake. It's a legitimate mistake. And when you look at this band plan over here, it looks like a technician could operate 40 meters FT8 because they can operate CW. Why couldn't they operate FT8? My point is, most of the violations that we cite are either not intentional or they're one-offs. There's somebody that gets a little mad because a net comes on. Or, used to you could say, hey, could you just move a couple of kilohertz? We're starting a net here in 5 minutes, and we usually run at this time of night. 90% of the time that works, but in 10% of the cases, the response is, I got rights. I was here first. I don't care if you've been running a net for 150 years and it's got 50 members. I'm staying right here. You know that attitude. You see it every day. There are people who I'm sure there are people who win a state lottery and then complain about how it's paid out. There's no doubt in my mind there's people like that. But anyway, we don't pursue one-offs. We pursue things that are detrimental and dangerous to the hobby, especially deliberate interference. And I hope that you're following what the Volunteer Monitor program does. There's a monthly summer in every issue of QST. It's the Volunteer Monitor program report for that month. And in a typical month, you'll see if I can find it right here. I'll get to it in a minute. In a typical month, there's 8 to 10 incident reports. There might be a couple of good operator commendations. And we also report the number of hours that volunteer monitors spend monitoring the bands, which has been phenomenal. These guys spend over 1,000, and women spend over 1,000 hours a month listening to the bands. Now that's good self-policing, and we're supposed to be self-regulating and self-policing. But let me just read you some statistics. Now, I don't really evaluate a lot of things by statistics because a CPA told me once that numbers don't lie, but if you torture them long enough, they'll tell you anything you want to hear. But let me just read you some 2023 program stats. There's over 20,000 hours monitoring on HF. We sent out 147 advisory notices. Some of those are friendly notices saying, please keep in mind the ID rule, or please keep in mind the band edge, and so forth. Others are more threatening, such as if we get another report of this, we're going to the FCC with it. There were 9 referrals to the FCC, and there were 2 referrals from the FCC. They will occasionally send us, they're doing a little bit more now, a case to gather evidence or validate evidence in a complaint that they have. We had roughly 1 FCC meeting a month, and we try to participate, or I try to participate in club and group meetings such as we're having tonight. Now, here's the important thing, and the only thing that means anything in all of these numbers. A couple of months ago, I ran some statistics to see what the repeat rate was. In other words, I took all of the advisory notices statistics, and I ran the call signs again to see how many of them got a second notice. I was looking for the recidivism rate. How many people just throw a notice in the trash can and don't pay attention, so that we have to send a second notice. We rarely send a third notice. After the second notice, we refer to the case to the FCC, but the recidivism rate was less than 0.5%. And so that told me they're listening to us, that our advisory notices and the program has some credibility, and they're listening to us. Now, the exception to this is 7,200, 3927, and 3860. That is the same group of people that have been doing things for years that are a great embarrassment to amateur radio. And don't go there. Don't even listen, because I just finished last year a 25-year survey of which frequencies cause, radio frequencies cause brain damage. And it's 7,200, 3927, and 3860. So don't even go there. Don't listen to it. You'll get brain damage. That's what's wrong with those people. The FCC has that case. We don't cite those anymore because the FCC has it. I don't know what they're going to do with it. But the thing about the FCC, you won't hear about what they're doing for a long time because they adopt the Internal Revenue Service model. But then when you do hear from them, it's astronomical. For example, we pounded them to please do something about an interference case in Oregon. And they said, we're working on it, we're working on it, we're working on it. Then they suddenly got silent. And about a month later, an $18,000 fine came out to that station. And that automatically corrected about 10 other cases of deliberate interference in that area. And that station's never been heard from since, which is fine for me. For me, my theory is his wife opened the mail, saw the $18,000 fine, and buried him in the backyard along with his radio. But that's all right. We'll take enforcement wherever we can get it. But he's never been heard from since. So I know that the program is working in that sense. And I wish that we could get a little faster action from the FCC, but I certainly understand why we haven't been. And the FCC staffing levels right now are what they were in the 1950s. And I don't know that that's going to get any better. So there's got to be some force multiplier out there that lets people know that we are out there. And most people will try to do it right. But if they're on the air a lot and they hear groups of other people not doing it correctly. They're not doing what they should be. It just deteriorates the whole service. Like if you drove a certain section of the interstate every day and you never saw and you knew that there was never a state trooper out there anywhere, you'd drive differently. You'd drive probably 75 or 80 and not worry about it. But if you know there's a good chance that they will be out there, it's human nature, and you just behave differently. Now, you'll also see on occasion when you look at these reports in the QST magazine, you'll see good operator commendations. Maybe you've gotten one of them. These go to people who we have several standards for excellence in the amateur radio service, and these are people that were nominated by the volunteer monitors. They don't all, just because you got nominated doesn't mean they get them, but what we look for is excellence in the amateur radio service. And excellence to me is caring more than others think wise, risking more than others think safe, such as volunteering to move when you don't have to. I heard one of the net controls the other night. Some guy came on and chewed out the net control, saying that was his frequency. And the net control said, well, we've been here on this frequency about 20 years, but we don't mind moving a few kilohertz if you'll give us a few minutes to call the net. Now, he didn't have to do that. But, just because you have a right to do something doesn't mean it's right to do it in every circumstance. Dreaming more than others think practical. Clubs and nets for new licensing and classes. It's hard to be a mentor these days because there's no Main Street America anymore. When I was 13 and wanted to get an amateur license, I rode my bicycle across town about 3 miles to W4ZDH's station. His QSL's on the wall, and he taught me Morse code. And I had a practice lesson, a few of those, and then I rode back. Now today, if you let a 13-year-old ride across town on their bicycle, social services would be knocking on your door real quick. There's just no Main Street America anymore. Maybe in some little towns in Kansas or Iowa, maybe so. But it's a sad state of affairs that you can't let a kid do that anymore. A kid can't spot a funny looking antenna on a house and go up to a stranger and knock on the door. It's just the sad nature of our times. But clubs and nets and you folks that run clubs and teach classes and have Hamfest, you are the saving grace of amateur radio. And the final thing we look for is expecting more than others think possible, such as helping to diffuse an altercation on the bands. We hear too many arguments on the bands, and the whole thing is, I want to feel comfortable having my granddaughter come down in the radio room and listen to amateur radio. For that reason, I don't listen to 75 meters. But we can't let this get out of control. We can't let it get worse than it is. We're a cross-section of society, and that's good. We have Nobel Prize winners. We have engineers, dentists, concert pianists, plumbers. We even have, sad as it is, some attorneys that are amateur radio operators. We're across the board here. And so human nature is different. I don't have to tell you. I think just looking at the few people that I see, we're probably all about the same age. And we have a little different set of standards than society does today. But I do have a few messages to different groups. To the nets, I would say that it doesn't matter how long you've been on that frequency. All frequencies are shared. And you just have to accept that sometimes that you can't be on that frequency. To the widebanders, the real widebanders, 10 kilohertz and so forth. If you want to be a broadcaster, just get a broadcast license. But being very wideband on crowded frequencies is rude and inconsiderate. To the contesters, they need to use a little more courtesy, even when operating split. And I know that's hard. To those who don't like contesters, just lighten up. They're short-lived. And you can learn a lot from contesters, and particularly the nets, the traffic nets. could learn from contesters. Contesters are the best operators in the world. And traffic nets that take 2 minutes to spell 3 words phonetically when they're already 20 dB over. You can't get messages fast like that. Learn from the contesters. To those who don't like FT8, FT8 has rejuvenated amateur radio, sort of like Echolink did to the repeaters 15 years ago. FT8 has rejuvenated amateur radio, and people who don't have the opportunity to have a really super antenna system, or maybe even have to have the antenna inside the house, they love FT8, and they're talking all over the world. And it takes some skill to set up FT8. So I have a great deal of respect for them. And to repeater owners, you've got to realize that your call sign is on that repeater. Now, your station in your house, if you left the doors open to your house and let other operators come in and use your station, and they violated the rules, you wouldn't call the FCC to straighten that out. You'd lock your door. But repeater owners, too many of them for some reason think that they have an open repeater and that it's the FCC or our responsibility to regulate the conduct on it. And it just doesn't work that way. It's your repeater. Keep these people off. If they're harassing you, tell us about it. We'll try to help you. Basically, we first recommend you go to the local courts and get a restraining order. That's worked in a lot of cases. And one fellow in Tennessee got a 30-day sentence for violating a restraining order, abusing and harassing repeater owners on his own repeater. And he was very smug about it. He appealed it to the Tennessee Court of Appeals, just knowing that they would say, well, this is a federal matter. The Tennessee Court of Appeals said, we don't care if it's a federal matter or not. You violated the judge's restraining order. So your 30 days stands. And a lot of states have harassment by communications laws now because of telephone and the internet. But there are over 22,000 repeaters in the country. And we'll help you as much as we can once you identify. But we can't go out and identify them because the repeater users know the territory and the other users better than the volunteer monitors ever could. And I suggest they look on it as a fox hunt and get to run this person down, find out a street address or a tag number. We can help you from there. But we can't babysit, we can't manage repeaters from the outset. To QRPers, thank you for bringing so much enthusiasm to amateur radio. I went to a QRP, little QRP convention once years ago that was a few days before Dayton, and I've never seen so much enthusiasm in my life. I mean, it renewed everything about amateur radio for me. And to those who don't like QRPers, anybody can use a linear amplifier as a crutch. To those who don't like de-expeditions, if a group of people want to go out and sit in 100-degree weather and swat mosquitoes and scorpions or sit on a rock for a week to make contacts, just let them do it. They don't last that long. And go use one of the work bands. Or maybe cut the grass or wash the car or do the list of things that your wife has for you to do. Just cut them a break and let them do it. The main problem with amateur radio, most problems could be solved by turning the big knob. And I got an Allied radio catalog back here from 1960, which was the year I got licensed. And of course, I got other radio catalogs in here. I love looking at the catalogs, but I've noticed on every single transceiver, every single transmitter, receiver, and transceiver, there's one big knob. That's the idiot filter. Just change frequencies. 90% of the problems on the bands would be solved. Could be solved if somebody would just be willing to turn the knob a couple of kilohertz. We got thousands of frequencies. We're not even channelized except on 60 meters. It doesn't hurt to give up It doesn't hurt to give a little bit. It's like amateur radio in the bands and crowded bands is a lot like leaving a concert or a church service or some kind of big event. If you got a clear shot, you can go straight down the road right out to the street and go home. You don't have to let anybody out from the side lanes. But if you do let them out, and every other car does, everybody gets home faster. You don't have to do it, but everybody gets home faster. It just makes everything work a little bit better. And so your role to help us, and I have a feeling most of you are already doing this. I'm probably preaching to the choir. Your club there has a pretty good reputation. I've checked it out. Just realize, and we all realize that we have privileges, not rights. Pay the wonderful legacy that joyfully occupies our lives. Pay it forward. I can't think of what my life would be like without amateur radio. It led to a career. And I've always loved amateur radio. And I think you guys are with me. I like the fragrance or the smell of vacuum tubes and old tube rigs. Now, a lot of people won't admit that. But in this room here, I've got HT37 and a Drake 2B there, and a Drake 2C and 2NT over here. And I do close the door over here and turn that on sometimes. Leave it on for a couple of hours. And I come in here and I smell all the tubes. The 7300 here, I leave that off, but I just smell those tubes. And it's the magic of radio. And here's the sad thing. Don't you feel bad for the people that don't understand the magic of radio? You can't explain it to them. They don't know what you're talking about, but we know what it is. And it comes from looking down in that tube. I remember as a kid looking down in the top of HT37 thinking, how can I possibly work Australia? And this little thing with a simple antenna strung across the roof. And it's our heritage. It's part of our life, and we can't explain it to these poor people who don't understand. But my main message to amateur radio, and I preach this everywhere, I love talking to amateur operators. I could do it 7 days a week if I could get by with it. And by the way, if anybody's cell phone rings and it's my wife, I am not here. I'm not here if they call you. But anyway, my message is everybody lighten up. And let's all try harder to be appreciative and grateful for this avocation. And it's not a hobby. It's far more than a hobby. It's an avocation. But if everybody would lighten up and have a little more kindness and remember why one knob on every radio you see, even Flex, has a big knob, remember why it's the biggest knob, that would solve 95% of our problems. Now, if you have any questions and you don't want to ask them here, my email is my call sign, K4ZDH at ARRL.net. Feel free to shoot me an email and I'll answer it within a day. And if you want to talk about it, put your phone number in there and I'll call you. I'm glad to do it. Thank you for inviting me, and I'll take any questions that you have.
Well, Riley, thanks so much for that wonderful, informative and presentation full of wisdom. I do have a question for you. I'm interested a little bit in what are the technical capabilities of these voluntary monitors. And just as a point, I'm looking at the August issue of QST on page 99, where you talk about a glider pilot club that received an advisory notice for operation in amateur frequencies, and also with a skydiving organization in California, also operating on amateur radio bands. How do you know who these guys are?
Well, in the skydiving case, that was an FCC case. FCC agents ran across that. And the hang gliders, some amateur radio operators heard them on 2 meters. And they went out and investigated it, found a club out there, and reported it to them, they seemed to be pretty nonchalant about it, like they didn't care. So we had to do a little bit of an attitude adjustment on that, and they haven't been on there since. So the FCC nails them. Sometimes we nail. We don't. I don't like to have the VMs do direction finding, and we don't want them knocking on doors, because you can't do that in today's society. You can't just go up and knock on the door. But in those cases, it was a little different. I mean, it's easy to run down a hang gliding society or a glider pilot association, but we don't normally do it that way. We normally do it just by monitoring the bands, and they report what they hear if there seem to be rule violations. And like I say, out of the 15 or 20 or so I get a month, usually about 10 warrant an advisory notice. The others, I just keep record of them, and if they're repeats, we'll talk to that person. But we don't. An example is ID. Everybody forgets to ID once in a while, and get a good rag shoot going. Somebody might go 15 or 20 minutes, 30 minutes without IDing. That's not going to destroy amateur radio. But deliberate interference will, or repeated and incessant QSOs with no ID, that has to be addressed.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I have a question. Fred,
Okay.
W9KEY. Just curious if the volunteer monitors are on the air and operating and talking, or do they just listen in the background quietly?
I think it's both. I encourage them to do amateur radio. And when I see somebody turning in an unusual number of hours monitoring, and they report every month, I will talk to them and say, hey, this is, I want you to enjoy amateur radio and do this as a sideline to amateur radio. Your job is not to spend all your time monitoring and looking for trouble, but we want you to be avid amateur radio operators. So I think what a lot of them do is they'll operate a couple of hours. They get a little tired of it, so they'll just listen for a while. Or maybe they'll operate and have the repeater on, 2-meter repeater radio on in the background, as I do now, and listen to that. So I want it to be a good, healthy mix. And we don't prefer people who are out to get somebody, because it's easy to aggravate somebody. That's the main thing is to if we do cite them, get them to buy into the program and explain why it's important. So the ideal volunteer monitor has a good, healthy mix of listening for violations and enjoying amateur radio operating.
Are they using scanners to monitor the bands?
They may use scanners for 2 meters, but no, not generally for our
Radio.
Yeah, it's just what they happen to hear. But when you got 190 that are active, they're going to hear a lot of stuff. And when you're tuning on 40 meters, look, I was tuning the other night, looking for a vacant spot on CW. You'll hear a lot of stuff as you tune through the sideband part of it. Just tuning around, seeing what's going on, and moving down to CW and working CW. It's just a reasonable, healthy mix. And the main thing is healthy mix, because they are volunteer monitors. They don't get paid. We don't want anybody that has an obsession with finding things wrong. It's like that old saying a policeman told me once. Somebody that really, 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 really wants to be a policeman probably shouldn't be a policeman. It's that you've got to have a healthy mix. And this is an avocation, as I said. And we don't want people who are out to nail people, because then we'll lose respect. And I hope we have the respect from most of the operators, but we don't want to do anything to cause us to be perceived as the band cops. And I told the league when I took this job here, I said, if any of the volunteer monitors ask for a badge, I want you to let them go immediately. And they agreed to it. So we're looking for reasonable people that are good amateur operators and understand that overall people try to do it right. but it's that small percentage, that 1% that can destroy it for everybody else. But we don't have agendas and we don't have chip on our shoulder. In fact, there's been a couple of people who got cited in an advisory notice, and their response was so conscientious and so thorough, they ended up being volunteer monitors. We sent them applications, and they're good ones. They're good ones.
Do other countries have similar programs, or how do they do their enforcement?
I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I do know that I learned this at the FCC. There's only one entity that represents amateur radio worldwide, and that's the league. And when I worked at the commission, when you'd go to what they call the 8th floor, which is where all the commissioners' offices were, it was like Grand Central Station up there sometimes. You know, you got the broadcasters, the internet people, the Sirius XM people, all this and all that, but you never saw anybody representing amateur radio if the league wasn't there. So some of the league officials. The league's all we have standing between amateur radio and oblivion, because the FCC has plenty to do, and they wouldn't mind not having that service to regulate, I can assure you. But we just have to appreciate that and be grateful for this avocation and pay it forward, and operate every day with gratitude. That'd be 90% of the battle right there. And I don't understand these people. You know, some of these people on the 7200. I know one person who has about $15,000 worth of amateur equipment between the flex radio and the linears and all that. And they operate that equipment as if they were juveniles on the family radio service. I don't understand. How can you have that much money tied up in amateur radio and you use it like an idiot? I don't get it. But then my grandfather told me once when I was a kid, he said, there's two things. I want to tell you two important things in life. And you may not understand them for a long time. But one is, if you're working on something and you can't figure out what the hell is wrong with it and you can't fix it, let it set a while and then go back to it. And I said, well, Granddaddy, that doesn't make sense. It's not going to fix itself. But years and years and years later, I knew what he meant. Your subconscious, your brain is working on it. You're thinking about it and you don't even know it. And you go back with a fresh approach. And like one time I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and realized what was wrong with this HT37. It just happens that way. The second thing was, he said, and he told my cousin and me this, some people are just, you're going to learn in life that some people are just crazy as hell. And they vote, they make babies, they drive cars, but they're crazy as hell. And if you understood them, you'd be as crazy as they are. So don't even try to understand. And boy, that is very valuable advice in today's society. There was a story on the news last year about a sinkhole over in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and swallowed up a couple of houses. But one house right on the edge of it that didn't get swallowed up, the Red Cross came in and was offering to move them. And the city said, you need to move and take advantage of the Red Cross. And the guy said, I ain't moving. I got rights. I live here. And I'm thinking, I hope the sinkhole gets you during the night, because you really deserve it. You can't explain people like that. They cannot be explained. Well, thank you. And as I said, feel free to email me. I enjoyed talking to you. And looks like I got some good rigs back there. And I'll do this anytime you want to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Riley. Thank you, Riley. It was a very good program. I really enjoyed it, and I commend you for doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And let me give you my phone number in case you need to call me. I'll always take the call there. It's 717-476-7379. So as I said, my email is K4ZDH which, by the way, 64 years ago last week, I got K4ZDH in the mail. And, I still got my logbook right here. Right here. August 9th, 1960. Still got and in those days, I don't know if you guys ever did this, but I have 12:45 p.m. call CQ, no answer. I logged that. I logged CQs when I didn't get an answer. Did any of you guys ever do that?
Yes,
Sure
absolutely.
did. Still got
I
my
got-
logbook with it.
Absolutely. I got pages full of CQ and no answers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
I've got pages full of that too. And it was an FCC rule at the time.
Yeah, anything you did, you had to log it. That's the way I
Right.
interpret.
Well, back in those days, we were crystal controlled. So we called CQ and we had $2 over the band trying to find somebody calling us.
That's right. I was thinking about that the other night. We had to tune around to find somebody calling us. And a couple of years ago, I got an SX110 over here, which is my first amateur receiver, and I had a Challenger that I had rebuilt. And I said, I'm going to do it just like I did when I first got my license. I don't know how we made contacts, particularly on AM, with a SX110 and a Challenger. I don't know how we did it, but I sure got a lot of them in this old logbook here. And if the house caught on fire, this logbook's probably what I'd grab first. But that means we're old school, and more power to us. Thank you, guys. I enjoyed this.
All right, thank you. Take care, Riley. Thanks,
Thank
Riley.
you. I'll sign out now, and I hope to talk to you again.